All right, let's dive into this article. As you can see, I've got three sets of highlighters here. I've got pink. I'm going to use pink for any information that's related to the main claim. I've got green. I'm going to use green for any information related to the methods that are being used. And I'm going to use orange for just anything else that's interesting, but maybe isn't about the main claim or isn't about the methods per se. The strategy that we're going to use as we go through this article in the first passes, we're not going to read the whole thing. We're only going to read the title, the abstract, part of the introduction, and the conclusion. And as we read, our only goal is to determine what the main claim of this article is. Because, as I said before, you can't evaluate an article unless you know what their main claim is. Because when you're evaluating the article, you're evaluating the support for the main claim. So we've got to first determine what this main claim is. So let's start with the title. We have gendered colorism, evidence from social categorization studies. So gendered colorism, that sounds like variable, something about the main claim. So we've got gender as a variable, we got colorism as a variable. I'm just going to make a note to myself that this sounds like this article is about, colorism is about like skin tone bias in general and gender. So maybe skin tone bias is like different for men and women, right? So that's my initial note there. Skin tone bias might be different for men and women. That's what I think they mean by gendered colorism. And the point of this first pass isn't to be right when you first read the article, right? I want you to be reading this article not in a passive way, but in an interrogative way. What do they mean by gendered colorism? Then we've got evidence from social categorization studies. So I'm going to highlight social categorization in green because it sounds like the methodology they're using has to do with categorization. So my current guess about this article is that they're going to try to show evidence for different types of skin tone bias, like light versus dark skin bias for men versus women through social categorization studies or studies that use categorization. So I'm going to just make a little note here that I think this is the DV. So social categorization is sort of the DV, or maybe it's the paradigm, something like that. So that's what I've gotten from the title. Now let's go to the abstract. Now when I read the abstract, again, I'm not being passive about it. I have already have my own ideas about what I think this article is about from the title. So now when I read the abstract, I want to see, am I right? Is there additional information in the abstract that clarifies things or gives me a new perspective on things? Or maybe I'm just totally wrong, or maybe I nailed it, right? I want to know, what is this study really about based on what I'm seeing in the abstract? So let's read it now. We've got the present work documents gendered colorism. So that sounds like the main claim again. It's gendered colorism using social categorization paradigms. Perfect. That's just confirming the title. Specifically, we document how skin tone influences gender categorization. Right. So, and I'm going to write this as skin tone influences gender categorization. That sounds to me like a very concrete or methodological. Like I could have put this in green, so there's no. But instead I'm putting it in pink because that sounds like another way of saying the main claim. They're going to look at how skin tone influences how quickly people can categorize someone as a man or a woman. That's what I think is happening here. And they say especially for Black women. So that's definitely a new variable relative to Black men. Okay. Across a diverse sample in 3 studies, we find, I'm going to put in green that the N across all 3 studies is 443, because that's definitely related to the methods. we find that darker skin consistently facilitates fast and accurate racial categorizations. And I'm gonna highlight this because it sounds like a claim, right? But I'm also just gonna write. It seems like at this point, the main claim is related to gender, not race. And I'm getting that from this line right there. So I'm just making a note to myself. Remember, it looks like they're maybe looked at categorization for race and gender, but the claim they're making is about gender categorization. Okay. Skin tone has a larger effect on accurate gender categorization of Black women. So let's highlight that. I think that is the big main claim. Skin tone has a larger effect on accurate gender categorization of Black women versus men, with darker skinned women being categorized the slowest and least accurately. So I think that is really the main claim. So I'm gonna try to really highlight that for my notes here. Like this is probably it. This is maybe the clearest description of what they're finding there. So together, these findings suggest that gender colorism may be most prominent when gender, but not race, is salient. I love it. This is a really great abstract. It's really explaining everything we need to know. It's highlighting everything. They point to another way that Black women may potentially experience intersectional invisibility when their gender identity goes unrecognized and unacknowledged. And further research examining evaluative judgments is needed to examine this connection. I'm just going to highlight these last parts in orange just because I found them interesting, but they're not something that specifically we need to pay attention to at this stage, but I just thought those were really important points the authors were making there. Okay, so we started with the title. The title said, we knew it was about colorism, how it might be gendered, as in colorism might affect men and women differently, and that they were going to use social categorization studies to test this. And now we have a really clear understanding, or it seems like we have a really clear understanding of what they're studying, which is that, skin tone influences gender categorization, especially for Black women relative to Black men. That seems like the main claim. Okay. But we can't stop there. We've got to do introduction and conclusion. And where we're going to stop with introduction is we're just going to start reading at the beginning, and then we're going to stop as soon as the authors state the main claim or state their research question. So usually in the first paragraph or the second paragraph or the third paragraph, usually in the first 3 paragraphs, the authors will state their research question. And when you look at a journal article like this, what you'll see is that a lot of times they use headings. So we see a heading called introduction. Then we see a heading here called historical origins. Usually the main claim or the research question is right before that first heading. So probably it's right there, but I'm going to read the whole thing until I see it again, because a lot of times you can get additional context from reading this first paragraph. So let's go. Skin tone bias, popularly known as colorism, is the process of discrimination that privileges lighter-skinned people and disadvantages darker-skinned people within a racial group. Darker-skinned people report experiencing more discrimination, have lower socioeconomic and educational attainment, and are stereotyped more negatively than lighter-skinned Black people. Despite this, there is little empirical research on the psychological manifestations of colorism and how it interacts with gender, specifically how colorism may disproportionately affect Black women. I'm just going to highlight that again, just this idea that colorism in this paper is partially about how it may disproportionately affect Black women. That seems important. Similarly, experimental studies exploring colorism often use Black men exclusively as stimuli, limiting our knowledge on the perception of skin tone. The present work fills this gap by considering how colorism impacts the social categorization of Black men and women. And that's important too. I'm going to highlight that. We begin by linking the conditions of slavery to the masculinization of Blackness and racialization of womanhood. Then we discuss social cognition research on gender and race and the contemporary masculinization of Blackness. We argue that colorism disproportionately impacts the categorization of Black women versus men in ways that may deny their womanhood. So I'm going to highlight this. Skin tone probably affects the categorization of Black women as women, and probably not as Black is what I'm guessing. Again, we're seeing the evidence of that from the abstract. We're seeing it again through the introduction, just this emphasis on denying their womanhood, right, as opposed to denying their race. So we're seeing that again, it seems like gender categorization seems to be more important here. So now let's skip to the conclusion. So we're going to skip the rest of the introduction because we already found the main claim or the research question. We're going to skip the methods. We're going to skip the results. We're going to skip most of the discussion. We're just going to go right to the conclusion. And hopefully the conclusion now confirms what we think is happening. And that's a key point here. This is not just about highlighting and writing down. It's when you get to the conclusion, you should have an idea of what this main claim already is, and you're going to want to see it confirmed in the conclusion. And if it's not, you got to go back and see, what did I miss here? Why did I not understand what their main claim really was? So let's check out the final page here. So I'll just, here's the general discussion, and then here's the final page. And now in some papers, you'll see that the conclusion is marked by a heading called conclusion, or you'll see a paragraph that starts with in conclusion. But here, we're going to just look at the very final paragraph. Does this final paragraph confirm what we believe the main claim of this article is? So let's read it. Despite these limitations, the present work makes clear contributions to current literature on colorism and gender, in line with and extending the intersectional invisibility hypothesis. Our work shows how skin tone influences categorization differently for Black women and men. Okay, so we're going to highlight this. And so that is definitely confirming what I thought this paper was about, even from the title, right? So great title. Their title was Gendered Colorism, which made me think that this was about how skin tone bias affects Black men and women differently. And that's exactly what the conclusion is saying as well. Let's keep reading now. Specifically, it suggests that skin tone is especially consequential for Black women versus men, mattering more for their gender identity to perceivers. Okay, so again, we're getting this idea that gender identity is really important. In the context of social categorization, this work shows another way that Black women are not fully recognized for who they are. And again, that's not about the main claim or about the methods, but I think just a really important point, so I just want to highlight it. And so that is how you do a title, abstract, introduction, and conclusion reading of a paper to find the main claim.